"You're early, Claire. Could you give us a minute? Family only, please." The words still rang in my ears even as the front door clicked shut behind me. The house looked almost unchanged. The same garlands wrapped around the staircase, the same glowing hearth, the same smell of cinnamon and buttered rolls that used to make me feel like I belonged. Except now I was the stranger waiting in the foyer, holding carefully wrapped gifts, while my name wasn't even on the place cards. I hadn't expected warmth, but I hadn't expected to be erased. Brian had taken my seat. Literally. From where I stood, I could see him at the dining table laughing in sync with my father holding Margaret's hand like they'd always been family. His tailored navy suit blended perfectly with Ashley's deep green dress. They looked like co-CEOs of Christmas. Meanwhile, I stood under the mistletoe, alone. "Garage is warm enough, right?" my mother asked, barely making eye contact as she breezed past me with a fresh dish of roasted vegetables. We had to give the guest rooms to Ashley and Brian. Daniel's still in his old room, and your dad's office is full of wrapping paper. I blinked. "Sure," I said. "I don't take up much space." Ashley passed me by wine glass in hand. "You still doing that startup thing?" she asked, not stopping for the answer. "Well, good for you. Real jobs are overrated." Real jobs. I remembered years ago when I first told them I wanted to build something on my own. My dad had chuckled. Ashley had sighed. Mom had said, "Claire, we're not saying no. We're just saying, focus on what's real." Look at Ashley. Apex knows how to spot talent. She still had the same corner office swagger. Only now it came with a six-figure bonus and a fiancé who was also her boss. I placed the gifts under the tree, each one hand-picked, personalized, wrapped like small works of art. No one asked who they were from. Dinner began without me. They said they thought I was running late. They said there wasn't enough room at the table. Daniel looked up briefly from his plate as if to say sorry with his eyes. But he didn't speak. He never really did. I sat on the edge of the ottoman by the fireplace out of frame watching as Brian toasted to family that drives innovation, and Ashley held his hand just long enough for my mother to beam. Then Brian mentioned something that snapped me back to the present. "I hear Apex is getting bought out next quarter," he said, slicing through his steak like he owned the company and maybe he thought he did. "Some silent firm. Nobody knows who." Ashley shrugged. "Doesn't matter. I'm not worried. Whoever it is, they'll be smart enough to keep the engine running." Smart enough. I smiled into my wine. No one noticed. After dinner, my father handed me a thin key with a Yale logo and said I turned the space heater on earlier. "You should be fine." The key felt cold in my hand as though it knew something I didn't. I stepped into the garage at 10:47 p.m. It was colder than I remembered. Cement floors, a folding cot, one plaid blanket folded with military precision. My suitcase sat upright next to an old snowblower. Above me, a string of half-working fairy lights flickered like they too were tired of being festive. I placed my laptop on a wooden crate and opened it. The screen glowed softly, warming nothing but my face. Inbox 3, unread, subject final approval, Nexatech acquisition of Apex Global Time. 9:22 p.m., Sender Board Secretary Nexatech Ventures. The title alone could have lit the room. Underneath it was a new message from Sophia. "All documents ready. Waiting for your go." I exhaled. Out there in the house I grew up in, they were toasting to a future they didn't realize I owned. They had no idea I was the silent firm. That I'd spent 5 years building something real, not to prove myself to them, but to prove that I never needed their permission. They thought I was the outsider. But they had no clue I'd just bought the table. I clicked reply and typed 3 words. Push it through. Then I shut the laptop. The garage was still cold. But I didn't feel it anymore. Nexatech's anonymous founder is female. That's all the leak says. I sipped my tea, slowly letting the steam rise toward my face, as if it could thaw the corners of the garage that no space heater could touch. The mug was one of those cheap ones from a gas station, chipped on the rim and stained on the inside, but it held heat better than the people in the house next door. The glow from my laptop screen was the only thing illuminating the room. The ceiling light had died 2 winters ago, and no one had bothered to fix it. Back then I didn't mind. Now it felt poetic. This place had always been a space to disappear, and yet tonight, my name was everywhere. Well, not my name. Just a whisper, anonymous female, brilliant. The news anchor's voice was flat clinical. In a surprise Christmas Eve leak, sources confirmed that the mysterious acquisition of Apex Global is being driven by Nexitech Holdings. The founder, still unnamed, is reportedly a woman. Speculation abounds regarding her ties to the tech industry elite. They wouldn't guess me. They never had. Ashley's voice echoed from memory too clear to be old. You're seriously turning down that internship Google was practically begging, and you're going to write code in cafes like some moody artist? I'd said no because it felt like someone else's ladder. I wanted to build my own. She thought I was being difficult. Dad had said I was being idealistic. What I was, they never understood, focused. My fingers skimmed over the keyboard as I scrolled through Sophia's live updates on our secure channel. Sophia Tran, 2314. Press is circling like vultures. Brian's PR team is scrambling. They don't even have internal confirmation yet. Claire Reynolds, 2316. Perfect. The Apex acquisition wasn't just strategic, it was surgical. We'd worked for months, me from quiet corners and anonymous logins, Sophia behind layers of firewalls, to position Nexitech as a holding firm. But everything had been architected down to the microsecond, and now it was time. My phone buzzed with a push notification. CNBC breaking: Apex execs caught off guard by hostile holiday acquisition. I let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. The irony of calling it hostile was rich, considering the last 3 Christmases I'd spent swallowing bitterness at that same table. Apex had built itself on talent, but the culture was all bloodlines and boys' clubs. Ashley fit perfectly. I never even got an interview. My eyes drifted to the blueprints of the acquisition projected neatly on the screen. Legal bindings, stock movements, shell transfers. Apex Global would by 12:01 a.m. be owned by me. I highlighted a single paragraph in the merger announcement: all leadership personnel to remain pending review by Nexitech Holdings. They'd scramble to interpret that in the morning. But first, Brian needed a proper Christmas gift. Claire Reynolds, 12328. Is the announcement server timed? Sophia Tran, 328. Yes. Midnight Eastern. We're ready. Claire Reynolds, 2329. One more thing. Sending an email directly to Brian, with attachment A. There was a long pause. Then, Sophia Tran, 2330. You sure, Claire Reynolds, 2331. They think I'm silent because I'm shy. Let's show them what silence sounds like when it speaks. I pulled up my drafts. To Brian Carter from Claire Reynolds, Acting CEO, Nexitech Holdings. Subject: immediate clarification regarding Apex transition attachment. Nexitech Ma, executive notice. PDF. Inside the PDF were 3 pages, a legal brief outlining Brian's upcoming demotion effective immediately, a revised board structure, and a statement authorizing a full audit of Apex's HR practices. Nothing illegal, nothing cruel, just consequences. It was also quiet. Not rage, not revenge, just math, just logic, just strategy. I added one line above my signature: P.S. Merry Christmas. I hovered over the send button. The clock on my laptop blinked, 23:59:48. I could hear the faint clinking of glasses from inside the house. Another toast, maybe? To Ashley's future, to family, to keeping everything in the family. I clicked send. The message disappeared from the screen with a gentle whoosh. The cold didn't seem to matter anymore. It was going to be a very long night for them. Every single view means a meal for someone in need. Just by watching this video, you're giving warmth, hope, and a full plate to those less fortunate. So watch now, share now, subscribe to the channel, and let's spread love together. You're joking. Ashley's voice shakes. You can't be the Claire Reynolds. I was standing in the living room holding a half-eaten cinnamon roll still in my pajamas and wrapped in a fleece blanket from the garage. The tree lights blinked behind me like nothing had changed, but everything had. The carefully constructed world they'd built where Ashley shined, Brian led, and I simply didn't exist, had cracked down the center. And I was the earthquake. Ashley stood with Brian's phone in her hand, the screen tilted just enough for me to see the subject line from Claire Reynolds, acting CEO, Nexitech Holdings. Even now, she kept trying to laugh like the universe had played a prank. "This isn't real," she whispered, reading over the email again. "It's someone impersonating you. Nexitech. You come on." Brian didn't say a word. His fingers were tight around the edge of the coffee table. On the TV behind him, muted news headlines scrolled with phrases like Apex blindsided by Christmas Eve acquisition and Nexitech's silent move stuns tech world. It was hard to watch him process it, the man who had once offered to drive me to the train station so I could get back to wherever it is you're squatting these days. He knew now, and he didn't like it. Margaret entered with a tray of more cinnamon rolls, her eyes scanning the room. "Why is everyone so quiet? What's going on?" Ashley turned to her, voice shrill. "Claire just emailed Brian pretending to be the CEO of Nexitech." I didn't speak. Brian, however, cleared his throat. "She didn't pretend." The room froze. "I ran the patents," he said, voice low. "The filings, the IP. They all trace back. She's the founder. Nexitech is hers." Thomas, holding a stocking filled with aftershave and scratch-offs, slowly sat down. "Wait, what do you mean, hers?" Ashley laughed, but it cracked in the middle. "No. She was coding in coffee shops and eating off coupons. She turned down internships. She couldn't even get a job at Apex." "Because I never applied," I said, setting down my plate. "I didn't want to work for you." Mom looked at me like I'd dropped a foreign language into her Christmas morning. "Claire, why wouldn't you tell us?" "Would it have mattered?" I asked. "You never asked what I did. You asked when I'd get serious. You told me to stop pretending to be the smart one in the room. You only asked questions when it was about Ashley, or Brian, or Apex." Dad looked confused. "But why the secrecy? If this is true, why hide it from your own family?" I could have answered a dozen ways. I could have said I was tired of being the shadow in Ashley's spotlight. I could have said I needed to build something on my own, away from their judgment. I could have told them about the years of silence, the condescension, the 1,000 tiny cuts that finally bled into resolve. Instead, I said I didn't hide. You just didn't look. Ashley stepped forward, still holding the phone like it might burn her. "You're not CEO material. You don't have the presence. You've never managed a team. You've been..." "What, floating, playing the long game from a garage?" I looked her in the eyes. "No," I said. "I've been building while you've been performing, and now I own your job." Brian finally looked up at me then, and I saw the flicker of regret. Or maybe fear. It was hard to tell. I didn't care either way. The silence that followed was thick. Only the fire cracked. Daniel sat on the armrest of the couch, not saying a word but watching everything like he always did. His gaze wasn't surprised. Just clear. The smell of cinnamon, once comforting, now clung to the air like smoke after a small explosion. I picked up my phone. Sophia Tran, 0708. Press ready to drop in 6 hours. Want to review the statement? I looked around the room. Stockings half opened. Coffee mugs cooling. The fantasy of family still trying to hold its shape. I slipped the phone into my pocket and turned toward the hallway. "I'll be out of your way in a minute," I said, already walking. "Garage girl needs to get back to her empire. We just assumed the founder was someone older, male." Brian's voice was tinny over the speakerphone, bouncing awkwardly off the garage walls, now lined with legal pads, whiteboards, and a map of Apex's internal departments. His words hung there for a second too long, as if they were looking for a place to hide. They didn't find one. Assumptions always die louder than facts. I didn't respond immediately. I was staring at a post-it note from 3 weeks ago. Midnight drop all channels. Sophia to finalize assets. Next to it was the final draft of the press kit open on my laptop, ready for the world to know my name. In 6 hours, I'd no longer be the ghost CEO. And Brian knew it. You were always around, he continued, fumbling. Quiet. I never imagined that I'd be the one pulling the strings I offered. He went silent. Sophia had warned me about this. Power doesn't shock people. Where it comes from does. Sophia Tran, 0912. Package finalized. It goes live at midnight Eastern unless you say otherwise. Investor statements ready. We've stabilized Apex's price. Market's in our favor. Also, I'm getting interview requests. WSJ Wired TechCrunch. Claire Reynolds. 0915. Let them wait. Focus on control first, press later. I leaned back in the chair, technically an old milk crate with a cushion on top, and watched as the heater blinked its usual protest. The garage didn't need to be warm. It just needed to work. I pulled up the latest email from the Nexatech board. Subject line: request personal CEO statement. Incoming press release. My name had never been on anything like this before. Not on family resumes, not in wedding speeches, not even on my own bedroom door growing up. But now it was on the header of a $1 billion press release. Brian Carter. Phone 17. Look, I'm not calling to fight. I need to understand what happens next. The press is calling me. Ashley's having a meltdown. Your parents think this is a stunt. I need to know where I stand. His voice cracked slightly. I closed my laptop and let silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to build. You don't stand? I said finally. You watch. There was a beat of quiet on the line. Then, to his credit, he didn't protest. Understood, he said. For what it's worth? I didn't know. That's the problem. Click. I tossed the phone onto the crate beside me and turned my attention to an old box marked Nexatech, Year 1. Inside were early printouts of logo drafts, trademark filings, the first patent application. I dug past the folders until I found what I was really looking for: a rejection letter from Apex Global dated 3 years ago. Dear Ms. Reynolds, thank you for your interest in the Junior Development Program. After review, we regret to inform you. It had been signed by Brian. Same signature he still used today. I read the final line aloud, almost to myself. We encourage you to reapply once you've gained more real-world experience. I smiled. Funny how doors lock just before they swing wide open. My laptop pinged again. Sophia Tran, 0958. Live in 6 hours. Want to review the final line? Then a second message seconds later, this time a voice memo. I hit play. Her voice was calm, clipped. The Sophia I knew. You're no longer the ghost Claire. They know your name. Let's not make this dramatic, Claire. Ashley's voice cut through the clinking of silverware and awkward sips of wine. The roast ham sat untouched in the center of the table, steaming slightly, like it hadn't realized yet that this wasn't a dinner, it was a reckoning. I didn't answer right away. I was staring down at the gold-trimmed plate in front of me, the same set Mom only used once a year. I could see my reflection in the glaze, blurred, cracked slightly by heat. Too late, Ashley. It's already dramatic. You just weren't paying attention until the spotlight turned. I think I said, slowly folding my napkin and setting it on the table. The drama was baked in the moment you told me I was being selfish for skipping your birthday dinner to pitch to investors. That pitch landed our first $2 million. Thomas shifted in his seat. Margaret gave him a look. Don't interfere. Ashley forced a laugh, her wine glass trembling slightly. That was years ago. We were kids. No, I said. I was a kid. You were already interning at Apex collecting promotions and telling people I was the family disappointment. Brian stared into his glass like it might offer a trap door. I never said that, Ashley mumbled. Daniel looked down, but this time I caught a small flicker of something in his eyes. You didn't need to, I said. Every time I came home, it was, how's the job hunt? Or, still doing the coffee shop coding thing. As if I wasn't building anything real. As if everything I said was a phase. Mom put down her fork. We were just worried. No, I interrupted calmly. You were dismissive. And there's a difference. I reached into my bag and pulled out a printed timeline. Nexitech's growth from garage startup to multi-holding entity complete with milestones. I slid it across the table. In case you were curious how long I've been leading Nexitech. Spoiler, since I was 23. Ashley didn't touch the paper. Margaret did handshaking as she scanned it. But we didn't know. Of course you didn't, I said. Because you never asked. Dad spoke for the first time, voice low. We came to your college graduation. We supported no. I said again. You forgot my graduation. Daniel came. Alone. Everyone turned toward him. Daniel looked up, blinking slowly. It's true. I told you about it in the group chat. You said you were in Napa. Ashley's jaw twitched. And while we're doing confessions, I added, keeping my voice measured, that scholarship Daniel got. The one that let him stay at Columbia after the tuition spike. That was me. Anonymous donation. You're welcome. Daniel's fork dropped. He stared at me like he was seeing a different person. Brian leaned back in his chair. He hadn't said a word since sitting down, but his discomfort was radiating like a heat lamp. I caught his eye. He didn't flinch, but he didn't look proud either. Ashley snapped. This is insane. You're trying to rewrite everything. You always think you're the main character. I looked at her. Not with anger. Just finality. I didn't need a seat at your table, I said. I built my own. Silence fell, the kind that doesn't end with someone clearing their throat. Daniel was the one who broke it. His voice was soft but clear. Maybe it's time we all stopped pretending. No one moved. The roast cooled. The gold-trimmed plates didn't reflect anything anymore. It's one thing to own a company. It's another to put your name on it. Sophia's voice came through the laptop, clear and direct, framed by the afternoon snow falling softly outside the garage windows. The light was low, almost blue, and everything inside felt too still, too aware of the shift that was coming. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the blinking cursor on the draft press statement. My name was there. In the header. In bold. Claire Reynolds, CEO. Not Nexitech. Not a signature at the bottom of a filing. Not a silent shareholder. This was a title. A label. A flag I'd never meant to raise. I built this to stand without me, I murmured. The work should speak louder than the face. Sophia's expression didn't soften. It does. But people don't just buy tech. They buy leadership. They buy belief. They want a name they can pronounce, search, idolize, or hate. You've stayed hidden long enough. I didn't answer right away. Outside, the snow was falling harder, tapping lightly against the window pane. The garage smelled faintly of cinnamon and cheap wood polish. The whiteboard behind me was crammed with strategy notes. I'd redrawn the Apex org chart 3 times that morning, trying to decide who would stay, who would go. The heater gave its usual groan, like it knew it wasn't really up to the job. There was a knock. I turned to see Margaret, my mother, standing just inside the doorway holding a tray with 2 mismatched mugs. Her coat was still on. Her eyes flicked to the laptop, then to me. I brought tea, she said. Didn't know if you'd had anything warm. I nodded, surprised. Thanks. She set the tray down beside me, avoiding the piles of paper and open folders. I noticed her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the mug closer to me. I googled Nexitech, she said softly. Not sitting. It's really yours? I looked at her. There was no accusation in her tone, no skepticism, just a mother trying to find footing in a landscape she'd never prepared to walk. Yes, I said. She didn't ask for proof. She didn't ask how or when or why. She just stared at the name on the screen mine, and the silence between us stretched long and uneasy. When she finally spoke, it wasn't the speech I'd expected. Your father doesn't know how to talk to powerful women, she said. Her voice was quiet, almost ashamed. Especially his daughter. I blinked. That's not an excuse, she added quickly, hands knotting together. It's just, he doesn't understand how you became something he never imagined. Neither did I. I sat with that for a moment. The rawness of it. The honesty. You didn't have to imagine it, I said. Just notice it. She nodded slowly. You're right. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. She picked up her empty cup, lingered for a second, and left with the door closing softly behind her. Sophia's voice returned through the speaker. You okay? I nodded once, then remembered she couldn't see me. Yeah, because we've got another issue. Her tone had shifted business mode. The board wants a public video statement. Tonight. You're the face now, Claire. No more shadows. I stared at the blank space beneath the draft email's signature line. My name waited there. The cursor blinked again. And again. Someone in Apex leaked an internal memo. They're calling you a shadow executive. Brian's voice came through the speaker with the weight of corporate dread, cool clipped and edged with something close to embarrassment. I sat motionless, staring at the document he'd just forwarded. The headline was impossible to miss, even in grayscale. Inside Apex, how an unknown tech founder manipulated a multi-billion-dollar merger from the shadows. So this was the thanks I got for discretion. I let the laptop screen go dark and turned to face the cheap webcam mounted on a tripod. The garage was quiet. The same garage they'd made me sleep in. My voice would leave this room, but its origin, its message would remain here, carved into the silence that used to protect me. They're calling you names, Brian added, still on the line. Anonymous puppet master, fraud, even, he hesitated, scam heiress. I snorted. Creative. They don't know what to do with you, he said. You don't fit. I didn't reply. Because he was right. For years I'd written code in coffee shops while VCs asked if my technical co-founder would be joining. I'd submitted patent filings under shell corporations to avoid gender bias. I'd made silent partner offers in my own company only to get called assistant during acquisition meetings. But this memo wasn't just about skepticism. It was backlash. A push to knock me off the pedestal I hadn't even claimed yet. I reached for my phone. Sophia had already texted twice. Sophia. You want to respond, Sophia? We can bury it in a soft release tomorrow. Or, I tapped back. No recording tonight. Sophia replied instantly, on standby. I stood, adjusted the makeshift lighting, set up a single ring light clipped to a broomstick, and ran a hand through my hair. No makeup, no filter, no branding consultant. Just me. I sat back down, looked into the lens. The camera light blinked red. My name is Claire Reynolds. I began, voice low but steady. I built Nexitech from a garage. This garage, in fact. The same one my family told me to sleep in because the guest rooms were taken. Pause. Breathe. Let it sit. I wasn't hiding. I was working. I filed patents while people assumed I was someone's assistant. I negotiated mergers while being mistaken for the intern. I've watched this industry mistake silence for weakness. Let me be clear, I chose quiet because it gave me freedom. Now I choose visibility because I've earned the right to be heard. I leaned forward. No script, just clarity. To the people calling me a fraud, check the filings. To those resigning because a woman in a hoodie outmaneuvered you, good luck out there. And to the team staying on, we're just getting started. I ended the video. 3 minutes. Sophia was already live syncing it to Nexatech's media channels. Upload in progress, she said via call. Press kit hits inboxes at midnight. We're calling the segment The Face Behind the Firewall. I closed my laptop. For the first time in days, the garage felt warmer. My phone buzzed. Brian again. Text only. The board just voted. They want you at the merger press briefing on stage. I stared at the message, then out the window. The snow was still falling, quiet and relentless like truth. I made my conditions clear. You wanted an empire. I brought you one. Ashley stood at the far end of the dining table, arms crossed over her designer blouse, the fabric too stiff for the tension in the room. The chandelier above us threw slanted light across stacks of legal documents. Holiday centerpieces had been pushed aside to make room for redlined contracts and amended org charts. My glass of wine sat untouched. Hers was half empty and untouched for entirely different reasons. You can't be serious, Ashley said, eyes flaring with disbelief. VP of Product Relations. Reporting to Marcus? She practically spat his name. He has 10 years of operational experience. I replied, flipping to the clause that defined her new scope. You have 3. One of which was spent planning brunch launches for a failed lifestyle app. She flinched. I didn't need to twist the knife. I wasn't here to gloat. This wasn't vengeance. It was structure. Ashley shoved the papers back toward me. This isn't about business. You're just trying to humiliate me. If I wanted to humiliate you, I said quietly, I wouldn't offer you anything. Silence. Heavy. Full of old wounds, unspoken nights, years of condescension rebalancing in a single moment. I remembered debugging her thesis at 17 while she was out drinking Prosecco with her sorority. I remembered staying up all night to ghostwrite her job application to Apex while she slept through her own deadlines. She remembered too. That's what made this worse. You think you're better than me now? She hissed, voice cracking. Just because you had some secret life and we didn't know, that makes you queen of the empire. No, I said. Results make me queen of the empire. Not secrets. Not spite. Just execution. Brian entered, briefly dropped a final page on the table. His eyes flicked to Ashley, then to me. Final contract addendum. HR approved. Thank you, I said. He nodded once, then left his footsteps silent on the hardwood. Ashley stared at the pen beside the signature line. She didn't reach for it. She looked at the door, the documents, me. There's no version of this where I win, she said softly. You've already taken everything. I leaned forward, steepling my fingers. No. I gave you something. A chance to rebuild under someone else's banner. That's more than most people get when they're caught failing upwards. Her eyes glistened, but she blinked quickly, forcing the tears away before they could become visible shame. With fingers that trembled more than she wanted me to see, she picked up the pen and signed her name. Ashley Reynolds, VP of Product Relations. The ink dried faster than her pride could catch up. She stood, didn't meet my eyes, and left the room. A beat passed. Then Sophia's voice came through my AirPods, barely a whisper. She'll either sink or sabotage. Watch her closely. When you left for college, it got even quieter. Daniel's words hung between us, drifting with our breath into the snowy air. The backyard looked like a postcard, pristine, silver-coated, but the air between us was real, weighted with memories that had never been spoken aloud. He had been the boy who watched. Never loud, never angry. Just present. I always thought you liked the quiet, I said, brushing snow from the stone bench before sitting. I did. But it stopped being peaceful when you left. It was just empty. I turned to him. Daniel's frame had filled out, taller, now sharper jaw than the kid I remembered chasing chess games and science kits. But his eyes were still the same, still holding too much. When it was just me, Ashley, and Mom and Dad, he continued, I didn't realize it at first. But they didn't see me. Not really. I wasn't the golden child, and I wasn't the problem child. I was the wallpaper. I winced. Daniel? He held up a hand not to stop me but to keep his own courage intact. I used to want to build something too. Fintech, maybe blockchain integration for underserved communities. It was just an idea. I told Dad once. He said, finance is already crowded. Better to find something achievable. I stared at the snow tracing lines in it with the edge of my boot. You gave me that scholarship, didn't you? He asked suddenly. I blinked. The Nexitech Foundation, he clarified. They said it was anonymous. But the letter came from Boston. And the phrasing in the mission statement, it sounded like something you'd say. I smiled. Small. Guilty. You were worth betting on. He nodded, swallowing that truth like it stung and healed all at once. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Just Wayne the crunch of distant tires against snow. Inside, our family was likely pretending the tension had passed, as if new titles and signed contracts erased old scars. Daniel's voice broke the silence again. Then, let me bet on myself now. I have an idea. I turned to face him, fully surprised at the fire behind his words. This wasn't the quiet observer anymore. This was someone who had been underestimated just long enough to grow teeth. He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket, creased messy, but filled with dense bullet points and diagrams. It's not just another app, he said quickly. It's a model for integrating microloans into existing payment platforms without predatory interest. I've been testing the algorithm on dummy data. The early projections show. He stopped himself, shook his head, laughed. I'm pitching. I didn't mean to pitch, but I was already listening, my eyes scanning the messy diagram, recognizing the brilliance buried beneath nervous ink. You're better than I was at your age, I said softly. I mean that. He looked away, jaw tight with unspoken emotion. Then he looked back. Will you hear my pitch? They're not questioning your power anymore. Now they're questioning your character. Sophia's voice was steady, but I heard the fatigue behind it. She'd barely slept in 2 days, managing the fallout from my silence, breaking her fingers, dancing between message boards, leaks, and legacy media, all gnashing at the same question. Who is Claire Reynolds? Really? I stood in the Nexitech studio, staring at my reflection in the lens of a camera that cost more than my first year of living expenses when I was coding in cafes. A soft navy blazer wrapped around me like armor, not designer, not flashy. Just clean. Clear. They wanted character, I'd give them mine. All of it. Behind the scenes, a monitor flickered with headlines. Shadow CEO, no more. Silence or strategy, the woman who bought Apex. Some pieces painted me as brilliant. Others hinted at manipulation, rebranding my refusal to take calls from legacy investors 5 years ago as evasive, calculating, obsessed with control. They weren't wrong. Not entirely. But they didn't know the whole story. I took a breath, looked into the camera, and began. I'm Claire Reynolds, I said. You've read headlines, heard speculation, maybe even made up your mind. Pause. Not for drama, but for oxygen. For memory. When I started Nexitech, I was 23. I worked out of coffee shops because office space was a luxury. I pitched to investors who told me to bring a male co-founder next time. I was told I didn't look like a CEO. I believed them for a while. The crew was silent. Even Sophia behind the glass leaned forward. But I kept building. I built when they laughed. When they forgot I existed. When I was told I didn't have enough polish or pedigree or poise. The words weren't scripted. I let them form as they rose. And when I was finally strong enough to own the table, I didn't want to sit at theirs. So I made my own. I could feel something shift. Not in the room, but inside me. All I ever wanted was to create something that worked better, fairer, more quietly. But silence doesn't protect you. Not forever. So here I am. A long breath. The close. Success is not silent, but it starts in silence. The camera light blinked red. Recording stopped. Sophia stepped into the room, her phone already lighting up. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me for a moment as if seeing a version of me she'd been waiting to meet again. Brian arrived minutes later, his coat still wet from the Boston slush. He scanned the playback briefly, then exhaled hard. They're calling it the best founder's statement since Jobs. I raised an eyebrow. That's generous. He shrugged. Well, they love a myth. You're real enough to be dangerous and just elusive enough to be legendary. Sophia's phone buzzed again. She looked up. Claire, are you ready for the interview? Front cover. Entrepreneur of the Year. They don't want an interview, Claire. They want a confrontation. Brian's voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. Not warning. Not fear. Just clarity. I glanced at the skyline through the tall windows of the rooftop studio, the lights of downtown Boston glowing like 1,000 silent questions. Snow drifted softly, dusting the ledges with glittering indifference. The world was cold, curious, and very much watching. I wasn't afraid of the cameras. Not anymore. But I was afraid of the cost. Not in shares or contracts, but in blood. My family's. Mine. Sophia handed me a final logistics sheet, color-coded flawless. We're synced with every major network, 10-minute delay feed. You're live across 3 continents. Brian hovered behind her, flipping through printed talking points like they were playing cards in a losing hand. If they push about Ashley. They will, I said. And I won't deflect. He raised an eyebrow. Even with this, he slid a tablet across the counter. The document on screen bore Apex's watermark, a timestamp from 6 days ago, and Ashley's name on a flagged internal directive temporary delay of merger integration pending leadership reassessment. She'd tried to pause my empire's arrival, behind my back. I didn't flinch. She wanted public stakes. Let her burn in public light. Brian didn't look convinced. You sure? I gave him the only answer I had left. It's time. Downstairs, the rooftop stage buzzed with production energy chords, lights, techs murmuring into headsets. Claire Reynolds' invisible architect turned reluctant icon was now the headline. I walked slowly, carefully past glass panels that reflected not the girl who'd coded in cafes or slept in a freezing garage, but the woman they were waiting for. I stepped onto the platform. The wind caught my coat, lifting it like a curtain call. Sophia's voice came through my earpiece. Mic's live in 5. Sound clear. You look exactly how they need to see you. The interviewer stood ready. Sharp jawline, crisp notes, years of experience cutting through noise. He smiled, but not warmly. This wasn't a feature. This was a trial. Camera light blinked red. I folded my hands calmly in my lap, centered my breath. Let's begin, I said. The first few questions circled expected territory, Nexitech's origin, why I stayed anonymous, what the silence meant. I answered steadily, candid but not indulgent. But then came the shift. The interviewer leaned forward. A leaked memo from Apex suggests a delay in merger terms was pushed from inside by your sister Ashley Reynolds. Any comment? I didn't hesitate. She had concerns. I let them echo as long as I could. Silence was a courtesy, not a weakness. The wind whipped harder now. His next question cut like a scalpel. So Ms. Reynolds, was it revenge? I never needed to prove anything. But they needed to learn something. The rooftop lights no longer felt blinding. They felt earned. As the city stretched wide behind me, a slow tension gripped the air like the universe had paused for breath. I adjusted my mic, gaze steady. The interviewer had just asked me if it was revenge. I answered with silence, first not out of hesitation but strategy. Let the tension simmer. Let them lean in. They call it revenge when you stop apologizing, I said at last. But I don't work in emotions. I work in outcomes. The studio audience was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold still. I was invisible long before I chose to be, I continued. Ignored in boardrooms, underestimated in meetings. When you're dismissed long enough, you learn to build without applause. The screen behind us flickered, live comments streamed in. Twitter threads, headlines, think pieces already writing themselves in real time. Ghost founder speaks. The tech queen in a garage. Family feud or corporate coup. Then Sophia's voice came through my earpiece, low and firm. Go now. Slide 12. The interviewer blinked as the screen shifted. An internal email thread from Apex's VP of Strategy appeared, subject line concerns about new leadership narrative. Another name appeared, Ashley Reynolds. I didn't look at the screen. I looked into the camera. Some people feared a woman's silence more than a man's noise, so they tried to make it mean something it didn't. The interviewer leaned in. You're suggesting Ashley, your sister, actively worked against Nexitech's merger. I didn't blink. I'm not suggesting anything. Slide 13. The screen changed again. A direct quote from Ashley dated 3 months ago. Claire's leadership is a PR stunt. She's not stable enough for the real spotlight. The room shifted. I didn't have to turn to know Ashley was here now. I felt her presence like static. I paused only long enough to slice the moment clean. You asked if she tried to sabotage me, I said. No. She tried to sabotage a company. That's the difference between family drama and fraud. The audience murmured. A gasp. A dropped phone. Then movement, heels clacking against tile, fast and sharp. Ashley. She stood red-faced, muttering something I couldn't hear. Then she was gone, storming down the side stairs and out of frame. I kept speaking. Not to the camera. Not to her. But to the future. I didn't build Nexitech to prove I was worthy. I built it because I was tired of waiting for permission to exist. The name on the paperwork is mine. The silence, too. And now the voice. The interviewer didn't interrupt. No one did. Backstage, I caught a glimpse of Sophia in the control room. Jaw-tight eyes, glassy. Brian beside her, his arms crossed, not in defense, but in defense of me. Then my phone buzzed. One text. Daniel. You just rewrote our family's history. And its future. The emails are public. Board has called for Ashley's resignation. Sophia. The words arrived as a calm murmur in my earpiece, but they landed like thunder. I stood near the glass wall of Nexitech's 19th floor conference room, Boston, stretching out below the skyline, crisp under late winter sun. Sophia's voice continued, cool and composed. It's unanimous. They want her out by end of day. I didn't respond right away. A long silence passed as I watched snow begin to collect along the outer ledge of the window. A flock of starlings flew low over the skyline, forming a perfect arc before disappearing behind a neighboring tower. They're drafting the statement, Sophia added. Ashley Reynolds, once introduced at every tech summit as the future of Apex, had officially become its cautionary tale. I turned toward the long oak table behind me. Brian sat at the head, speaking in hushed tones with the Apex board members who'd flown in after last night's interview. No one raised their voice. The betrayal wasn't loud, it was procedural. Tidy. Brutal. Ashley was nowhere in the room, but her name was everywhere. Minutes later, Sophia stepped in, tablet in hand. Do you want to review the exit clause they've triggered? No, I said quietly. That's for lawyers, not sisters. A pause. Then she said, she tried to call you. Did you answer no? Good. We moved on. Daniel arrived around noon, cheeks red from the cold eyes, bright with something close to pride. He looked different, older maybe, or simply unburdened. I pitched, he said, standing in front of me with that boyish defiance he never used to wear. To whom I asked. To the same VC firm that laughed at you in 2018. That made me smile genuinely. Let me guess. This time they didn't laugh. They offered seed funding, he said. Enough to build the MVP. I stepped forward and pulled him into a brief hug, catching him off guard. You earned it? He laughed against my shoulder. You're still terrifying. Brian joined us a moment later, nodding respectfully toward Daniel, then turned to me. Apex share price rebounded. PR coverage is shifting. You've become a force. No, I said. We've become one. And I meant it. This wasn't about me anymore, not just me. We watched the news unfold, from the boardroom screenshots of Ashley's emails plastered across tech blogs, headlines announcing her exit, former colleagues distancing themselves on LinkedIn with carefully worded statements. But the one image that lingered wasn't on any screen: Ashley standing alone on the sidewalk in front of Nexitech HQ. I saw her from above, her coat too thin, her stance unsure. Her eyes lifted toward the massive digital billboard across the street. My face stared back at her, accompanied by the headline, Claire Reynolds Entrepreneur of the Year. She didn't cry, didn't shout. She just stood, as if trying to make sense of a world that had reshaped itself without asking for her permission. And then my phone buzzed. A voicemail from a number I hadn't seen since last Christmas. I pressed play. I watched your interview. I'm proud of you. My mother's voice cracked on the final syllable before the message ended in a soft, uncertain silence. We set another place this year, in case you came. Margaret. My mother stood just inside the entryway, her hands folded in front of her, voice soft enough to pass for reverence. Snow clung to the sleeves of her coat and melted in tiny beads onto the polished wood floor. I took the statement in slowly. Not a demand. Not guilt. Just possibility. The smell of roasted rosemary chicken drifted through the air, mixing with the scent of pine from the tree Daniel helped me decorate yesterday. White lights blinked steadily, not flashy, just warm. My home wasn't grand. Not like the Reynolds house, but it was mine. Every brick, every screw, every chair was something I chose. I looked past her into the dining room. The table was set for 8. A modest handmade maple slab I had commissioned from a woman in Vermont who never branded her work. One of the chairs sat slightly off-center, the extra place. I didn't say thank you. I just walked in and hung her coat. Margaret followed quietly. Behind her, Thomas trailed, carrying a bottle of wine he likely spent too long choosing. He hadn't aged much, but his silence did. It weighed more than it used to. Sophia was already in the kitchen, managing a staff of 2 with seamless grace. She gave me a brief nod. Are we good? And I returned it. We were. Brian arrived shortly after, punctual as ever. He wore a charcoal coat and carried a single envelope unmarked. I would ask about it later. For now, he kissed my cheek just gently, just enough. Daniel was last holding a casserole dish like it might explode. I cooked, he announced proudly. Sort of. When we gathered at the table, it was quieter than I expected. Not tense, just reverent, like everyone knew they were stepping onto something delicate. A bridge made of fresh ice. Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a photo album, the old kind with sticky plastic pages and faded captions. She placed it in front of me without a word. I opened it. There was a picture of me holding a robot made from soda cans and loose wires. Another of me at 7, covered in glitter, holding a certificate labeled 3rd grade invention fair. Honorable mention. No high school graduation photo. Of course. They had missed it, and now they remembered. I closed the album and slid it toward the center of the table where the candlelight could catch its gold binding. Thank you, I said simply. Dinner passed with fewer awkward silences than I expected. Thomas cleared his throat once or twice but didn't speak until dessert. Then, as the last bites of cranberry tart were passed around, he stood. Claire, he said. May I? I nodded. He followed me into the hallway, the echo of shoes against wood louder than his words. I was proud he began. I didn't say it, but I was. Am. I know I said. He waited for something more, but I didn't give it. I had space in my life now for progress, not rewrites. When we returned, Daniel was holding his glass. He tapped the rim lightly. "I'd like to say something," he said. Everyone looked up. He stood slowly, voice even. "To the tables we build," he said, "and the bridges we choose to cross." The room stilled for a beat. Then glasses lifted quietly. And I felt it, something like warmth, but sturdier. Not forgiveness, but maybe recognition. Later, as the fire burned low and coats were gathered, Brian lingered beside me, watching the flames cast gold across the glass. He didn't say much. He rarely needed to. But tonight he leaned in just close enough for his voice to reach only me. "What's next?" Every single view means a meal for someone in need. Just by watching this video, you're giving warmth, hope, and a full plate to those less fortunate. So watch now, share now, subscribe to the channel, and let's spread love together. They tried to exile me to a garage. I turned garages into empires. Claire. The light in the room was diffused, just warm enough to feel intentional, just cool enough to feel real. The interviewer sat across from me in a muted gray suit. Legs crossed, a legal pad on her lap. No script, just curiosity. Behind her, glass walls framed Boston in full winter bloom. Snow drifted across the skyline. From this height, everything looked calm, but I knew better. This office was new. Sleek, but not sterile. Modern lighting met reclaimed wood. A framed photo of my old garage leaned against a bookshelf. A robotic prototype I built in college sat in a glass case right next to a first edition of The Myth of Meritocracy. The blend was deliberate. Sophia had insisted I leave space for legacy. Daniel had given me the robot restored and rewired on my birthday. Brian had taken the photo of the garage himself. The interviewer smiled politely. "Let's start at the beginning, shall we?" I tilted my head. "You mean the garage?" "Exactly. That story has gone viral in the last few weeks." "It's funny," I said. "That space used to feel like exile. Now it feels like an origin myth." She nodded. "Your words." They tried to exile me to a garage. I turned garages into empires. That's resonated globally. I let the silence hold for a second. Just long enough. "It's not a metaphor," I said. "It's infrastructure." Her brow lifted slightly. I went on. "There are so many brilliant minds stuck in metaphorical garages. Women, immigrants, neurodivergent people, parents who code at 2 a.m. because that's the only time they're not needed elsewhere. We call them underdogs. I call them founders." The interviewer smiled again, this time for real. "And your new initiative?" I leaned forward, placing a small black folder on the table between us. Inside were the founding documents of the fund Sophia and I had finalized last night. 20 million, I said. Seed capital for underrepresented women in tech. No strings, no sandbag evaluations, no panels of men asking them if they can balance motherhood and management. The folder sat there humming with quiet weight. No one I added should be sent to the garage just to be heard. Her eyes lingered on mine for a moment longer than necessary. She didn't write anything down. Some truths didn't need ink. "And your family?" she asked. "Where do they fit into this chapter?" I paused. "My brother's building a company that might outpace mine within 2 years. My mother still overthinks voicemails. My father sends quarterly reports of improvements. And Ashley is working things out." I didn't elaborate. "What about Brian?" "That one made me smile. He's allergic to labels." She grinned. "Fair enough." A moment passed. She flipped her page. "If you could go back?" she asked. "To that first night in the garage, would you do it all again?" I laughed softly. "Absolutely. But next time I'd bring a heater." We both laughed, but it faded quickly, the way laughter does when it leads to something heavier. She looked at me again this time with a seriousness that came from knowing this would be her closing question. Claire, what do you want people to remember about your journey? I turned to the camera. Not for drama, but for direction. Because this wasn't a soundbite. It was an address. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard, I said. You just have to be undeniable. The interviewer didn't speak right away. She closed her notepad and stood offering her hand. Thank you, Claire. I shook it. Thank you for listening. The crew began to pack. The lights dimmed. I walked back to my desk looking over the city that had once treated me like a ghost. My phone buzzed. A message from Sophia Press Reception RSVP list is full. Shall I expand the venue? I typed back. Yes. We're just getting started. Then I looked at the framed garage photo one last time. And this is just Chapter 1.